What mattered most to Balanchine? Well, I wouldn't be as presumptuous as to say I know that, but I'll tell you one thing that did matter very much to him was food and drink. And he loved to talk about it endlessly. So I thought, look, we did this beautiful opening night gala, Balanchine. And here we are, closing night. How do we top this? What do we do? Something different. So I thought, let's merge the matinee and the evening. Let's make it one performance. Let's make it a 5 hour, 6 hours feast. Let's make a dinner.
Welcome to the final installment of the Balanchine celebration, a grand finale for a festival that has covered 73 ballets in the short space of 8 weeks. I have a personal connection to the New York City Ballet as a member of its board, but I'm a relative latecomer to the work of George Balanchine, so this celebration has given me a chance to see some of his work for the first time.
He was generous. This man was generous in so many ways, and he just gave his ballets away to everybody. And all these companies all over the world benefited from very little or no money whatsoever for all these years. So how best to pay tribute to him than to the closing day, perhaps have some of those people from representing those companies that he was so generous with come and donate their services and join us in this evening. And we have dancers coming from London and Paris and Russia and San Francisco, and, to join us. And I think it's a very fitting tribute because Balanchine was not just a New York City Ballet.
In part one, we retraced Balanchine's path from Russia, where he was born in 1904, to Europe. And this evening's dinner menu was designed to follow the same route. The audience is just finishing the main course, a European selection made from Balanchine's own recipes. And now we're about to arrive in America just in time for the dessert ballets.
he loved to eat, for instance, and I used to tell him, describe how wonderful would be wonderful Russian small cutlets in the sour cream and with little mushrooms, you know, and so forth and so on, and vodka he loved, and all the little hors d'oeuvres, Russian zakutska is around. As soon as I started to tell him that, he immediately, you know, forgets everything, and he starts to, you know, be very happy about this. Even to the last moment when I came here to see him, about a week before he died, I know that I told him how I could prepare him and bring it, this wonderful, and he looked at me and he tried to say something, and then I say, what? And he, in Russian, he screamed finally one word, when?
Everybody knows who was around Balanchine. He used to say, there's nothing like more and more and more. The more, the better. Tendus. People give 15 tendus or 16 tendus because then they don't give 32 because they know the dancer's not going to like it. So they give 16 in front or 16 to the side. Because otherwise the dancer going to lose interest. You've got to do 64 front. Doesn't matter whether they like it. It's about how many. And obviously how. Balanchine's class was about more. More. Not more steps, not more inventive, but more of one thing. I remember when he said to me, tomorrow you teach class. I said, I teach class? I've never taught class before in my life. He said, no, I know. Tomorrow you will. Yes. I said, fine. If you want me to, I was still a dancer. I taught class, and I thought, you know, my God, this is really not easy, the New York City Ballet. What do I know? So all of a sudden he walked in, and he walked right over to me, next to me, and stood next to me. So I thought, Jesus Christ, here's Jesus Christ next to me, and I'm going to stand and teach class in front of his company, with him next to me. It better be good. So I began to invent. I began to choreograph all kinds of intricate steps on the music and half time and double time, and I thought, I'm going to have to impress him. I have to impress him. And I said to myself, the worst thing I can do is give saute, step, glissade, assemblée, which is the most elementary in ballet. So I gave all this intricate stuff and said nothing. The next day, he called me into his office and he said, see, class, you must give saute, step, glissade, assemblée. Only. Only. And it was a revelation to me. I understood, all of a sudden, immediately, that the essence of class is like he used to, you know, the analogies that he used were brushing your teeth. You know, that's what class is about.
I wanted to have a certain way of dancing. We came from Russia and we had this technique of filling the stage. But still with this, I was moving these legs out more and more turnouts and stronger knees and more turns and bigger jumps. You have to know what they need. You have to know what's lacking. As some people, they have a little more of that and less of this. See, the bodies are different. One acquires a little faster speed, the other one have a little more of elevation. You have to watch every one separately, see what each one needs.
We were rehearsing Raimonda Variations, and I guess I was about 18, and everything was very new to me. And I was in the corps de ballet, and at one point, two of the corps girls come forward in a big ensemble. It's my big moment to shine, and we did it, and he stopped, and he said, "Why are you saving? Why aren't you jumping?" I said, "Oh, well, I thought I was, but I'll try it again." So we went back, and here I come again, and this went on about 4 or 5 times. He kept making me go back to the corner and try it again. So by the 5th time, I was getting a little aggravated by this. So I came plowing down the center of the floor in this big ensemble, and I slipped just as I took off. So I went flying through the air on a tilt and landed on the floor, on my back, right at his feet. And I looked up, and I said, "Was that it?" And he said, "Yes, dear, that was it."
I was talking to him one day, and I said to him, you know, "Mr. Balanchine, sometimes I don't quite feel like I'm really dancing, that it's me. I don't understand. I explained to him that there was some kind of a transition that I felt that I hadn't gotten to, that I hadn't achieved. And I couldn't understand. I would watch other people dance, and I could see that they had gotten. I could see that they understood something about the dance that I didn't quite understand. I was still in the corps. I mean, I was starting to get soloist things from him. And he looked at me and he said, "You know, dear," he said, "one day you'll wake up and you'll know." He said, "We can't teach it to you." He said, "But I know you will get it. One day you will get it." And he said, "I am a gardener." He said, "All of you are flowers, and some of you bloom very early and some bloom later, and some will last for a whole season and some will last for part of a season." He goes, "And each one of you is a different flower and will give a different perfume."
to be in a performance when Mr. Balanchine was in the front wing was something very special because it was his normal place and you could almost always find him there every performance. And there was such a feeling of inspiration coming from that wing that even to this day, we call it Mr. B's wing.
When he was in the wings, the power of his presence made everybody feel that he was sort of like there looking only at you.
You really felt committed to doing it correctly. You also felt good that someone was watching you all the time. It reminded you, it was a great focus instrument, I felt, because it always reminded you to stick to what he was wanting and asking you for during the day in rehearsals.
I didn't feel nervous that he was in the wing watching. I actually felt it was comforting to me, and it was more supportive than judgmental.
When you're on stage, you can still hear his voice in certain ballets giving you encouragement.
And Mr. B asked you to crawl on all fours and do it, you would say, right now, okay, I'll do it. And then I remembered that, in Don Q, he has a section where there are pigs. And you have to scurry across the stage as a pig. But it didn't matter because if you were a good pig, that's what counted. So you'd scurry across being a pig, and if he was like, that's right, then you're like, it was a wonderful pig. It didn't matter because it meant, and he had respect for that. He had respect for whoever you were and whatever you did when he saw the integrity that you gave to your work and the love and the devotion. He respected it whether you were a child, whether you were an apprentice, a corps member, a soloist, or his, ballerina. It didn't matter.
I find myself looking into Mr. B's wing a lot more often than normal during this celebration.
What I had really, I could see and hear, probably better than anybody. And maybe that's the blessing, you see. God said to me, no, that's all you're going to have. You're going to just see and hear. And it's not your business to think. I said, fine. I don't know myself except dancer. I am a dancer. Even now I'm old, but I still can move. Oh, I can tell exactly how it feels to dance. So I can teach, I can stage. So it's like horse is a horse. If you ask horse, why you are a horse or what are you doing? You just live horse life. That's what I do.
Nobody can succeed Balance. Nobody. That's a given. You know that the minute that the day he dies. You know that before he dies. But that's not the point. The point is to take what he left us and devote your life to preserving it and taking care of it and being a link.
Thanks. What is this, carrot cake? Yes.
Dessert this evening is carrot cake and brownies, two American favorites. Balanchine loved America, the movies, the music, the wide open spaces, the bodies that were taller and stronger, the vigorous way Americans moved, the syncopated way they walked. There was inspiration here, there was support and raw material. There was also an audience, small in the beginning, but devoted. In Stars and Stripes, Balanchine paid tribute to his adopted country, where his talent found its home.
Sousa is a composer that was influenced, or he was a pupil of Offenbach. And he played, I think, violin or viola in Offenbach's orchestra. He was Portuguese, I think, something. But he wrote French Offenbachian type of music and marches. And marches that he wrote adopted here by our army. It's a 120 metronome, which is the French march. It's very fast walking. Did you see French people walk? They walk like mad. See, that's how American walks. Why? Because of Sousa.
This is the house of Balanchine, and something like what you just witnessed could not have taken place if it hadn't been for his, if you will, spiritual guidance. But maybe the person to thank most, because it's ultimately because of him, Lincoln.
I met a man, it was at the Lady Cunard's or something, cocktail party. We were all together, close, and the tall man looked at me. And he said, what are you going to do? And I said, me, I'm going to try to get to America because there's nothing to do here. And he said, I'll get you there. I said, who are you? And he said, I'm American. And that was Lincoln.
Jerome Robbins. Excuse me, one second, wait. Do you all have your shot? This is to Mr. Balanchine, and let me tell you how he taught us to do it. There's two ways. There's the dignified way, and there's Balanchine's way. So let's do it quick.